Jim and I are pretty pumped and excited. We are on our way to
Ostrich Land! We're going to see the ostriches in Ontario!
Yes, we are on our way to see the ostriches. We're on the horrible 401W. And even more exciting is we have two of our most incredible friends, Jordy Lishman and Laura J, with us. And if you don't know who Jordy Lishman is, so the Lishman family, they made that movie. His dad actually made an aircraft. It's in the 90s, right? Yeah. In the 90s, Fly Away Home, where he made this aircraft to fly the geese south. Incredible. Yeah, Jordy is a phenomenal artist who makes like the most epic structures out of metal and other things, and has had his art in the Science Center. Like, that's what high level caliber this artist is. And then Laura J, Jim and I call her
She's like a super genius. She's got this really unique way of putting facts together to look at very complex subjects from a unique point of view. And once we can get it broken down, you'll understand how smart she actually is. She's a really, really, really smart, great lady.
Yeah, and she's an author. So we're gonna ask Jordy some things first. So we just found out that Jordy actually had some interactions and experience with the CFIA, right? So here is Jordy Lishman. Jordy, hey, so can you tell us your thoughts on the whole ostrich massacre and your experience with the CFIA?
Well, I'm not a big fan of government overreach. Of course, we need government for all kinds of stuff. We have shared infrastructure, but then they want to control everything. So my big issue was that they used PCR tests to determine whether the birds were healthy, and they tested them once and wouldn't retest them. There was no, if the family actually did any tests on the birds with the PCR tests, they would get fined, right? Like, this is kind of ridiculous. Why are the CFIA allowed to test the birds and make solid decisions where the family's not allowed to test the birds and see if this flu of the birds has passed? I mean, it seems a little bit suspicious. Like, there's no actual, they're not really looking for the truth of whether these are dangerous birds. They're just following a mandate, and they're pushing it to the nth degree. It seems crazy to me. Right. I mean, the person who invented the PCR test said it should never be used for this kind of testing. The PCR test is notoriously unreliable. I know people who have, obviously we all got to know the PCR test during COVID, and if you wanted to go to work, you could just take a PCR test until you got a positive one and say, hey, I'm not coming in. Or if you wanted to go to work, you just keep taking a PCR test over and over again until you got a negative one, and then you could go to work, because they're so unreliable. They're there's a very small window in which they work in, and you can't control that in a real situation, a real field environment.
Right.
So it's very dubious, all of this kind of stuff. Now, the fact that this family decided to not comply with them is why it blew up into the giant situation they do, because this has been happening all over the place. They've been killing tons of animals throughout the years. Now they have the PCR tests, and I'm worried that that's just going to lead them into a huge amount of being able to control our food sources, being able to control humans' interactions. I mean, obviously not the CFIA, but it's just a dark and drizzly hole to go down, I think.
Absolutely.
So, Jordy, what was your experience with the CFIA? I didn't know until just now that you've actually had previous dealings with the CFIA.
So when we were doing the migration projects, and the movie Fly Away Home was based on our family, but it was loosely based on our family. Me and my brother didn't exist, but we actually do exist. And the whole purpose of the migration experiment was just for being able to see if we could imprint a migration route onto a species, so that we could have some control of where they're going, what air routes they're taking, and where they're landing and breeding, so that we could put them in protected areas and have them thrive. One of the great kind of successes is the whooping cranes, that there's one flock that goes from Alaska to New Mexico, and they've established a second flock that goes from, I think it's Patuxent and Cedar, well, I can't remember, but it's South Carolina, sorry. So there is a bunch of birds that are flying there. So if the one flock gets wiped out because whatever natural disasters are creeping up our way with all the changing environments, that there's another flock that could possibly take up the slack. So when we were doing these kind of tests, we get permit from the government to collect wild goose eggs or whatever birds we were working with. At the time the CFIA came in, it was swans, and we had acquired some swans from a protected natural wildlife to see if they would be also receptive to flying behind an ultralight, so you could possibly teach them. But apparently they didn't think that our paperwork was good enough, so they came in and nabbed all the birds and took off. And they had been watching us, like, camped out on our property. I found the camp once and I was like, oh, who are these guys? What are they doing? So they're spying on us because they were worried that we were we were taking wild birds, raising them in captivity, and then releasing them into the wild. And they were suspicious that you're not allowed to do that because they think that they'll gain some kind of illness and then be released. I personally think the whole science behind the viral infections, the way they talk about, is kind of one-sided, because there's a whole another side, is that when you stress an animal, they get ill, and when you put them into a small confined area like they do in farms, animals get ill, and it could be more to do with the stress than pathogens. So they're not looking at half of the information, and the reason they do that, I think, is because there's no marketable way to protect against it. If it's all stress-based, then PCR tests and masks, none of that matters anymore. It's understanding the psychology and how the psychology is reflected upon biology. But I mean, they don't want to look at that, and they never do. So yeah, our dealings with them weren't very pleasant either. They never told us where they took our birds. They never got them back, and they just basically said, because swans are protected, we're not allowed to have any interaction with them.
Wow, that just does not seem fair or right.
Well, even if we're doing it for real altruistic causes, which is to try to figure out whether or not we can help these birds by imprinting migration routes on them, they don't really care about any of that kind of stuff. They're just, this is the letter of the law,
right,
and this is what's been decided. And I don't know who was at the top making all the decisions, because it seems very biased. Just like I'm very suspicious of the medical industry, and because they're essentially pay to play, and they don't care what damages are created. If they're putting out new drugs or new this, they want to make a lot of money and a quick overturn.
Right.
I worked for the medical industry, and we designed all kinds of amazing mechanical devices for healing, which got bought by a pharmaceutical and stashed, because selling people drugs for the rest of their life is much more profitable than actually healing people, right?
Yeah.
So it's like giving the weapons manufacturers the job of implementing world peace. It's just not a good idea.
Right. So, Jordy, you had 2 geese that were your watchdogs.
I had some pet geese.
They were epic.
Yeah.
What were their names again?
Art and Sweetgrass.
Art and Sweetgrass.
They were Chinese geese. One was white, one was brown.
Did you ever have any problems with them, like with the CFIA? No.
Oh no! I mean, they're domestic, so you're allowed to have them, and they got a cold every once in a while. Well, once they had a cold, but
they got better.
They got better, and they're fine. I mean, I would hate to have to test them with a PCR test and say, "Oh, look, they've got a cold."
Yeah.
So Jordy, we've been talking a little bit about the current situation with what happened there at the ostrich farm, and kind of how it was dealt with, and how there's a lot of different ways it could have been dealt with. But now that we're in the situation that we're in, what lessons what lessons do you feel we can learn from this, and what do we need to implement to ensure that this doesn't happen again to a farmer who would prefer to not have their entire flocks destroyed?
Geez, that's a good question. I mean, really, you have to go to the top and find out who's making the policy and why, and put that in front of a jury of people who can decide whether or not this is actually a good idea. Because why were the birds just tested once and never retested? How come if they get the tests are so unreliable, how can that be the measure of whether we're killing all of them or not? It shouldn't be that way. And if we could find out who's made that policy and why, and actually decipher the science behind it, and then put that to a jury of people who are logically thinking, I think you'd find that none of them agree with how it's being done. So if we could disarm that would be a big step to whether or not it's possible to move forward in a real good way.
Yes.
Where you can say, what are these birds a risk to natural wildlife? Are they going to spread this thing? I mean, the whole concept of spreading this disease is still, in my mind, a theory. I mean, I think there's parts of it that are true, and there's parts of it that aren't, because it's not very clear. Some birds don't get sick, some birds don't. When they had birds getting really ill, and they put them in a contained area with a very healthy bird that had been free ranged, there was never any transfer. They could never get the healthy birds sick from the exposure. But there are some there's some scientific evidence that says contrary, and there's scientific that says other side. So we need to tell both sides of the story to be really clear on what's happening, and it's not happening. So that would be great. I mean, how do we stop government overreach? We got to all kind of step up and say that we don't want it.
Yes.
We are, the government works for us, the people, and people can't be afraid to challenge them, because if you are, then you're just going to get sucked down that dark hole. Right?
We were talking about personal liability as a potential answer to this. We blame the government, but the government and them and they. It's very vague, and there's very many different departments of them, they, and the government. So we were talking about holding people personally liable for being involved in something that is either criminal or abhorrent. I don't know, even...
And this is where Laura J's expertise comes into play. So, Laura, what are your thoughts on the whole ostrich situation and like the legal part of it?
I think we're dealing with entities, and that's what corporate entities are. And when you're dealing in entities, you're dealing with fictions. So if you're trying to put a fiction on notice, and I said some ghost is coming after me, you question my sanity. And I think a lot of this is around making people question people's mental health. It's always been about defrauding and defaming the individual that speaks out and resists and has a contrary narrative to the mainstream narrative. So to, like what Jordy said about finding out who's on the top, you do that, but you also find out who else is underneath of that, because within a matrix structure, which is a leadership structure, you're literally dealing with a corporate ladder, and all of the ladder holdings are positions that have people in them, and you can cut off the head of the figurehead, but if you're not actually holding people liable in their private capacity, the ability to lie means that you're holding an entity to account, but they can't. An entity isn't real. So if you're trying to hold something that is unreal to account for something that it can't do, then shame on you is basically one of the maxims of law.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool. So if I'm right, Laura, so what you're basically saying is by holding a corporation accountable, or a company or an organization, you can't really, because they don't really exist, they're just fictions, as opposed to the individual people involved in those corporations are individual people, persons, and they, in their own capacity, should be held accountable for the things that they're involved in. Is that correct?
Men and women have persons. A person is simply the way that we interact or interface with the corporate fiction. So it's just like a Facebook account. If you don't have the Facebook account, then you can't play in the realm of Facebook. Well, our person is the way that a man or woman is able to engage with fiction. So we use our person, it's just a legal person is in a third person perspective, and a natural person is your first person perspective. The difference in storytelling is I, me, my, us, we, ours. Those pronouns are related to someone able to tell their own story. So when I am telling my story as the principal, then I'm actually able to stay as the one in command of my story. A legal person is on the lower tier, and this is where the matrix structure comes in, because if we're dealing in unreal and real that is blended, that's where you're in the roof of the public, which is the first person properia persona. And then if we don't hold that position because it was claimed under the Sestica v. Trust Act in 1666, we will then fall underneath of either the trustee or agent side, which is professional, or we'll be relegated to the legal person, which is the account holder and the one who pays for the trip, which may or may not make sense, but essentially it's just to say none of us are persons. We have persons, but if we don't understand that person is a measurement of a title, son, of which I don't qualify, for I am a daughter if I am to use that notion, then we're dealing in things that aren't real, and if we don't know that we have something but are not the thing that we're implied to be, we're going to be part of the fiction that keeps us entrapped.
Yeah. That's almost like a lot of people think that they are their thoughts, as opposed to having thoughts. That's really cool. If you want to look into this a little bit further, look at the all caps person. I don't know what else terminology might people want to look into. This is common law perspectives, okay? This is natural common law perspective. This is the idea. I'm going to put it in very rough terms. My language isn't right, and please don't quote me. But the idea is that we are, as an individual man, as an individual man, I hit this ground, I don't have a name, I don't have a birth certificate, I got nothing. I'm just a little blob of flesh that landed on this earth. And that's who we actually are. As opposed to, on my birth certificate, there's an all caps name that says my name is ... and then that is traded on the markets as an asset to the corporation that is Canada, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I don't want to get into it too deep, but we will have really deep conversations with Laura at some point.
So I learn every single time I'm in their presence. I love it. So we're super pumped. We will go live again to show you the ostriches because we need to get our ostrich fix, and we will see you in a little bit.
Yay!